First things first, we have a conference that is the only power conference that decided to release their schedules in the middle of bowl season, in the middle of playoff season. I really wish they would have waited until after the national championship game just so that we have something more to talk about. It's a little bit more fresh in our brains,
Mhm.
leading into this episode, right? But the SEC is going to be first. So here's how we're going to do things for each conference. You guys are going to see. Oh, I need to go ahead and bring that out. That is a classic college football red zone blooper. It's going to go on the blooper reel at the end of the season. So essentially, what we're going to do, and this is going to apply to each of the conferences. We're going to talk about who we think's our biggest winner, who's going to be our biggest loser, as well as a team that maybe be tickling our pickle a little bit. Has piqued our interest in terms of what we're watching a little bit more closely now that these teams have released their schedules. So, Reed, my right hand man, I'm gonna let you go first, man. Go ahead and get started in filling out this board.
Yeah, for sure. So for the SEC, my biggest winner off the bat is A&M. My reasons for this: they avoid Ole Miss, national semifinalists, and Georgia, who has obviously ran the SEC for a very long time, which is a huge plus. You avoid two of the big dogs of the conference, but you still get Texas, LSU, Bama, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Missouri, South Carolina, Kentucky, Arkansas. So it is a workable schedule, especially to the caliber of A&M. But you are getting a few bottom feeders from last season. South Carolina, Kentucky, Arkansas aren't really the cream of the crop of the conference. South Carolina does still have Lenore Sellers, so they're obviously a team to watch out for. Kentucky is a little unknown right now, especially with Will Stein taking over and the handful of transfers that they did make. It is a hard schedule for A&M. Of course, they play in the SEC. It's always a hard schedule. But just going it week by week, they open up with Missouri State, which you would have to assume that's a win. Arizona State is a very intriguing out-of-conference game in week 2. And then they get Kentucky to open up SEC play at home in week 3. Go on the road to Baton Rouge in week 4. Arkansas at Missouri. They get the Citadel for their classic, mid to late season random FCS team. At Bama, October 24th. That is obviously a key game for them. They get a bye week before heading into their back half. At South Carolina, host Tennessee, at Oklahoma, and they finish the season on what is that? Yeah, that's Black Friday against Texas. So it's obviously not the easiest schedule by any means, but I think it's a win just solely because you missed two of the big dogs in Ole Miss and Georgia. So I'm going A&M for my biggest winner. My biggest loser is, let me pull it up here. Biggest loser, I think, is Georgia. Solely because you get a lot of the big dogs. You get Alabama, Ole Miss, and Oklahoma. Not to mention your rivals, Florida, Ole Miss. I said that Missouri and Vanderbilt are obviously two upper tier teams in the conference. South Carolina and Arkansas are the bottom feeders. So Georgia is probably my loser. They open up with Tennessee State, Western Kentucky. So those are their out of conference games. They open up SEC play, sneaky game here at Arkansas week 3. Can't overlook the Razorbacks. Of course, on the road, anything can happen. We saw that to Tennessee a few years ago. Oklahoma is their first home SEC game. Vanderbilt at Bama, Auburn, and then the Florida game at Ole Miss, Missouri. So that's a tough 5-game stretch right in the middle of their season. Vanderbilt at Bama, Auburn, bye week, Florida, and then at Ole Miss and Missouri. So that 5-6 game stretch right in the middle of their season is going to define what we see out of Georgia this year. Wait, what did Colton say? They did, man, I'm not reading that comment. At South Carolina, and then obviously the rivalry game against Georgia Tech at the very end of the season. So I think this is a very tough Georgia schedule. Again, that 5 to 6 game stretch right in the middle of that season, if they can go 4-2 in that stretch, Bama will always be a challenge. Florida is a rivalry game. Ole Miss should be reloaded. Auburn and Missouri are kind of the question marks. Also intrigued to see how they play against Jared Curtis of Vanderbilt. Obviously was committed to Georgia prior to flipping to Vanderbilt, and then he goes on the road in his first season, which for this example, I'm assuming he's the starter. So Yeah, I think it's a very tough schedule for Georgia going into 2026. And then the team to watch, actually, who I just alluded to, it's Vanderbilt. With Jared Curtis taking over the reins for Diego Pavia, they get 4 of the lower tier teams in the conference. They get Arkansas, Auburn, Mississippi State, and Florida. Florida, you would assume, is bouncing back with John Summerall in year 1, but they miss a few of the big teams. So they're scheduled week to week. Austin P and Delaware, they're 2 out of conference games to start the year. Oh, well, sorry, NC State, they get 3 straight out of conference games. That NC State one could be interesting week 3. They go on the road at Auburn and Georgia to open up SEC play, which are 2 very tough environments in that conference. Ole Miss, Arkansas at home, go on the road to Kentucky, a bye week at Mississippi State. And then their final 3 games are pretty challenging. Alabama at home, they go to the Swamp to play Florida, and then rivalry game against Tennessee to finish the year. So if they could get to that bye week, go into their last 4 games, I would say maybe 7-2 potentially, you have a real shot at running the table in that last 4 games. At Mississippi State is, I mean, I wouldn't say a cakewalk, but it's obviously nothing. I would say that's an easier game. Bama, they're probably going to get Vietnam flashbacks when they walk into that stadium. At Florida is never easy, and then Tennessee, you never know. You beat them last year, so who knows? So I think Vanderbilt got away with a pretty manageable schedule in my eyes. So they're my team to watch. Also, mainly because of Jared Curtis. I think Jared Curtis is going to be a stud there, especially we saw what Pavia could do under Clarkley. I think Jared Curtis has the skill set to potentially be better than Pavia. But those are my winner, loser, and team to watch in the SEC.
Yeah, and I certainly like Vanderbilt was something that I really thought about putting on my graphic as well. Like because I'm looking at Vanderbilt's schedule, and in my personal opinion, I think Vanderbilt has the easiest schedule in the SEC. Now, does that mean a lot? Because we're talking about a conference that, according to my way too early rankings, we're talking about a conference that does have 13 of the top 25 schedules in the country, just from a strength perspective. That's one thing, but I certainly think Vanderbilt may have one of the more navigable schedules in the conference, which bodes well, especially as you're getting away from that Diego Pavia era. And Clark Lee has to prove himself a little bit. We haven't seen Clark Lee have success at Vanderbilt outside of Diego Pavia as being a starting quarterback. So it's going to be very fascinating to see whether he's going to be able to keep that going and sustain that success going forward in what is truly one of the toughest conferences in the entire country, at least from a top to bottom perspective. Granted, last few years they have won a national championship. Don't know if they are still the best conference in the country. You could certainly make a case that they're not, but just from my personal rankings and just what the numbers are saying, there's a lot of tough schedules in this conference. It's going to truly be a gauntlet moving forward. So with that being said, going to go ahead and fill out my board. So to get things started here, I'm actually going to go in terms of biggest winner. I know you kind of alluded to this team earlier. I actually have South Carolina as my biggest winner in terms of the SEC conference itself. So this is what I'm seeing on my end. First and foremost, we talked about earlier tonight in terms of that bye split. Teams only have one bye over the course of the year. They have quintessentially the perfect split. You're talking about a team and a program where they're going to play 6 games to start the year, and then they're going to be on bye. And then after that, they're going to have another 6 games. I mean, you literally cannot ask for a more perfect split just from the get-go, right? So I think South Carolina really lucked out from that perspective. They do also avoid either 6 of the top 8 power rated teams in the SEC. Either they avoid completely. They avoid Ole Miss, Texas, Vanderbilt, and Missouri. They avoid those teams completely. And then Georgia and Texas A&M. That's going to be their toughest games that they're going to experience in the SEC. But they do have them in their home building. And what people need to realize is that South Carolina, that is a sneaky good place to play at. It hasn't received as much love as they should because of the fact that South Carolina hasn't been great ever since we saw Steve Spurrier retire as the head coach of South Carolina. But with that being said, that is still a really good program. And then at the same time, you also have the benefit of Arkansas, Kentucky, and Mississippi State. All of those teams are going to be on your schedule as well. Teams that all still need to prove themselves, whether it's Jeff Lebby at Mississippi State, still trying to get over the hump and still lead them to their first winning season since taking over for the late Mike Leach, RIP to the Pirate and to an absolute legend of our sport. You also have Arkansas on the road, which playing on the road in this conference is particularly difficult. But if you're going to do it, you're going to do it against Arkansas. You're going to play against Ryan Silverfield, who's going to be your brand new head coach. He's going to be getting used to playing in an SEC environment constantly. And Ryan Silverfield was at a team in Memphis that was towards the top of resources in the American, and yet consistently had a difficult time reaching the mountaintop, winning the American title game quite a few times where his teams, he had the best roster on the field and still lost, namely that UAB game that he lost was unquestionably bad. And then you have Kentucky, which on paper looks like a vastly improved team from last year, but Will Stein still needs to prove himself as a head coach, and you have to see that Porter class really come together. So all of that in mind, I really have South Carolina as my biggest winner. Now, on the flip side of that, I got to go to the Texas Longhorns. Not only do I believe the Texas Longhorns, they genuinely have the toughest schedule in the SEC. They have the second toughest schedule in the entire country. My number one ranked team from a strength of schedule standpoint, I'll talk about them a little bit potentially later tonight. But Texas has the toughest schedule. Not only talking about Texas in regards to what they have to deal with in conference play. Obviously, you got to go and play Oklahoma. You got to go play Ole Miss. You also have to go play Texas A&M on the road to end the year. But even the non-conference play, there is really no breaks. First and foremost, they're one of the few teams in the country, at least for the Power Four, that does not play an FCS game. So they do not have that quintessential bye game that they can lean on at any point in the year. They have to go and play Ohio State. Ohio State is going to look to be a team that will likely be in the top 5 and top 10 to start this season out. So that's going to be a really tough challenge for the Texas Longhorns. And even their other two non-conference games, it's not going to be complete pushovers as well. UTSA was a little bit inconsistent this year, but they've shown the ability to put up points on the board. They can certainly blow some teams out. UTSA blew out Tulane, who not only went on and won the American, but they were the top G5 team and went to the college football playoffs. So UTSA, if they show up ready to play, they can absolutely give Texas trouble, particularly if Texas does not show up ready to play, because we have seen this last year where, Texas did struggle a little bit in non-conference play, even outside the Ohio State game. They had a couple of performances where, they ended up winning the game, but at the same time, though, Texas did not play at a very high level. And then Texas State as well. That's probably going to be their weakest non-conference opponent. But even them, this is a team that went to a bowl game this past year. They have returned their offensive core. They are bringing key players back on the offensive side of the ball. Their offensive core is coming back, and they can put points up in a hurry. So again, while they should be favored to beat Texas State and UTSA, those are not going to be complete pushovers. It's not like playing a UMass, for example. No offense to UMass, but so I actually have Texas as my biggest loser. Not only because I think they have a tough schedule, but there really is no opportunity to have a quote unquote break, right? So that's going to be really interesting to see how the Longhorns are going to handle that moving forward. And then the last team that I have as well, in terms of team to watch, I'm really intrigued by Ole Miss. I think Ole Miss has a relatively navigable schedule, just in regards to what they have going on in terms of relative toughness. I think it's going to be in the bottom half. You do have the opportunity to play Charlotte at home. You do also have Florida on your schedule. Florida has to go and prove themselves as well under a brand new head coach, John Summerall. You got Auburn as well at home. They have a brand new head coach as well. You do have the very late bye week in Wofford, an FCS opponent, and then you close out the season as well in Mississippi State. Again, Jeff Lebby still needs to prove himself in year number 3. And we saw Pete Golding being able to rally this team together as well. Not only doing what you're supposed to do and beating Tulane in the playoff, but also rallying to beat Georgia in that quarterfinal matchup and giving Miami a very tough time as well. That is a game that Ole Miss very well could have won. We could have very well seen Ole Miss playing for a national championship. So now that we are going to see a full season under Pete Golding, and it's a relatively navigable schedule, I'm very curious to see if Pete Golding is going to be able to have a similar type of season, maybe not like the same caliber of season, going 11-1. That's going to be incredibly hard to do. And that's an insanely high expectation, regardless of who you are. But at the same time, though, there's certainly a path here where Ole Miss can absolutely get back to the college football playoff under Pete Golding if he's able to carry that momentum through this non-football playing season and into 2026.
Yeah, I mean, just going through your three, I agree. Texas was right there with biggest loser, especially just solely because of that Ohio State non-conference game. That's just another added level to their schedule. But you made very good points about their other two non-conference games. They don't get that FCS bye week to start the year. They have to go right out of the gate and play two teams that, for all intents and purposes, might have a chip on their shoulder because they are playing the big dog of the state. They are playing, the face of Texas. So I don't hate that. The thing with Ole Miss, as I pulled up their schedule again, I think their first three SEC games are going to be a challenge. They open up SEC play with LSU, which, aside from LSU just being a really good team, you have to deal with the whole narrative around Lane Kiffin returning. They go on the road at Florida and then at Vanderbilt. So, I mean, it's going to be a tough road for Ole Miss and Pete Golding, especially in year one. I think getting your first full-time head coaching job in the SEC is not going to be the easiest cakewalk. So, yeah, I think I completely agree with you. Ole Miss is definitely going to be an intriguing watch coming into the next year, just solely because I am interested to see how they do perform with Pete Golding, under the helm full time.